I'm hearing the things in my woods again. I don't know if you can hear the noise. I'm recording with night vision right now. I've been hearing the sounds in the back of my woods quite a bit. What the heck is that? Oh my god!
Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. I'm 27 now, and my brother, who is part of the story now, is currently 23. I was about 13 when this happened, and I and my brother still remember it. I can't remember what day this occurred, but it was a school night at about 11 p.m. My brother and I shared a room, which meant we also had a bunk bed. My brother slept on the top bunk, and I slept on the bottom. I'll need to explain the layout a bit, so you guys have some context as to why I can't explain what happened. Directly outside of our room is the main hallway to the house. To the left of our door is our parents' door. A utility closet is at the very end of the hall, way next to their room, and then the office room and bathroom are on the opposite wall of our room. The ceilings aren't very high. There's about 3 inches of clearance between our door frame and the ceiling. This will be important later. I was laying in bed, awake, at about 10:45 p.m. My parents were asleep, and my brother was asleep, but I simply couldn't. Anytime this happened, I'd simply let my thoughts wander in any direction until I finally fell asleep. But abruptly, at 11 p.m., the noise happened. Thump, thump. I lurched up in bed. It sounded like someone slammed their fists against the wall at the end of the hallway, followed by a couple of lighter, sounding thumps right after. Everything was quiet, and I could hear my heart beating in my chest. I was sitting there, wondering how this didn't wake anyone else up. Then the sounds picked up, but louder. It sounded like something heavy was climbing on the walls outside in the hallway. These weren't the little scratchy, like sounds of a squirrel or something stuck in the walls at all, but loud and prominent thump, thump like Spider-Man was climbing our wall back and forth in the hallway with his palms. The sound traveled back and forth twice before I heard my brother call out my name. "Jay," he called out. "Yeah, I hear it too." The sound continued to crawl the wall very fast for what felt like 5 minutes. Then the pace slowed down. When the sound was traveling back to our door, it got to a walking pace until it jumped right outside our door frame. Complete silence. There was no motion from me or my brother. We stayed quiet for 2 more minutes, expecting the noise to pick back up. Eerily felt like I was being peered at from the doorframe. After what felt like ages, I whispered, "On the count of 3. We bolt to Mom and Dad's room." We did the countdown and then sprinted. We must have sounded deranged on the other end, just a cacophony of banging on the door and yelling. My mom opened the door dazed and confused. "Something was climbing on the walls," I yelled. "Did you not hear it?" She gave me a look of skepticism, but when my brother chimed in, she got concerned. My dad then swept the whole house with his shotgun, eventually giving us the whole coast is clear. What bothers me is, how did this not wake the parents up? The sound was loud enough to shake the whole hallway. If it were actually an animal, how could it sound as heavy as a person, let alone make the sound come out of the hallway? The ceiling clearance is so small that nothing that heavy could be stuck in the wall and travel past the doorframe and come back with the same speed. If it were of a paranormal nature, why hasn't this happened more often? The only other strange experience that could remotely have anything to do with this would be the day I saw a hazy gray form behind my backyard fence. It was the rough size and shape of a person and didn't move. Even when I had the courage to step within 8 feet of it, it still didn't move and still confused me. It wasn't a vapor, smoke, or a small cloud. Just a gray mass that you could look through like your vision was colorblind at that one point behind the fence. Anyone else experience this kind of thing? If it's a familiar phenomenon to anyone else, I'd love to know. This stuff still messes with my head, and I've never experienced anything like it since. When I was 4 or 5, we stayed with some of our family in an old house. Because there were so many people, I usually slept with either my mom or my sister. Mostly my mom. I always felt uneasy when I visited this house, especially at night. This one night, I was sleeping with my mom, and I heard someone calling my name. At first, I thought it was my sister or one of my cousins. I got out of bed, left the room, and went into the hallway. It was always dimly lit at night in case anyone needed to go to the bathroom. I looked down the hall to the rooms my sister and cousins were in, but their doors were closed, and I didn't see any lights peeking under the doors, so I knew they hadn't called me. I heard the voice call my name again, and I immediately turned in the direction of the stairs at the other end of the hall. The voice kept calling my name and telling me they needed my help. I slowly walked down the hall and stopped at the top of the stairs. The hallway light illuminated most of the stairs except for the bottom two, so I couldn't see anything beyond that point, just darkness. The voice called my name again, but the tone shifted slightly. It was a little more friendly and inviting. It said again that it needed my help. I asked it why it needed my help, but it said it would have to show me for me to understand. It begged me to come down the stairs so that it could show me. I took a step down the stairs, but a voice in my head said it was a trick. So I yelled down to the voice that it was trying to trick me and that I was going to get my mom. The voice started begging me more to help it, and began to make crying sounds as if it were in pain. I immediately felt bad for it, and started taking more steps down the stairs as the voice continued to plead for my help. I got halfway down the stairs when a voice screamed loudly in my ear, "Don't take another step. If you do, it will take you, and you won't be able to come back." I stopped immediately, frozen where I was. The voice at the bottom of the steps asked me why I stopped. It told me to keep coming. I yelled no, and I told it I knew it was trying to take me away. As I turned to run back up the steps, the voice let out a loud growl of frustration. I was only able to go up one step before hands materialized, coming up from the step I was on, grabbed my ankles, and tried to pull me into the solid wooden stairs. I started screaming to be let go and beating the hands with my little fists, but it only pulled me harder. I felt as if it was starting to pull me into the stairs. I started screaming for my mom and begging her not to take me. All of a sudden, I felt hands around my waist and a force pulling me up and away from the hands. I looked up and saw someone with me. It materialized from a somewhat smoky state until it became as solid as me. It was levitating in the air as it reached down and had its arms around me, attempting to pull me up and away from the stairs. I clung to the being as if my life depended on it, because I knew instinctively that it did. I am not sure how long the tug of war went on. I just remember that the voice at the bottom of the stairs growled, getting louder with frustration, and me crying and begging the being not to let it take me. Eventually, the being was able to pull me free from the hands. It lifted me up, but I soon realized it was taking me too far. It was going to take me through the ceiling. I freaked out and started squirming in its arms, begging it to take me to my mom. It started descending and then set me down in the upstairs hallway, outside the room my mom was in. I busted through the door, ran to the bed, and started shaking my mom awake. I was hysterical. My mom woke up and asked me what was wrong. I tried to explain it to her, but I was crying so hard and shaking that she couldn't understand me. She told me it must have been a bad dream, and she tried to comfort me. She held me until I eventually fell to sleep. The next morning, I tried to tell my mom what happened, but she again dismissed it as a bad dream. Maybe it was. The funny thing is that other members of my family mentioned that morning that in the night, they either heard what sounded like yelling in the hallway or asked if there was a dog in the house because they thought they heard growling downstairs. Just to preface, this is a temporary account, as I am in pure fear that somehow this person will track it back to me. I live in a quiet neighborhood in a suburban town in Queensland, Australia, with my roommate. We are childhood friends and are both finishing our studies at university. The occurrences started around 2 months ago, with the most recent update only last weekend. About 2 months ago, I cannot recall the actual date. I was lying in bed late at night watching a soccer game, drifting in and out of sleep. I usually just use the background noise to help me fall asleep. As I would say, I'm a very nocturnal person. I felt like I was on the edge between being awake and asleep when I heard an urgent pounding on the front door. The way the house is shaped, my bedroom is approximately 10 meters from the front door and backs onto the front courtyard. The knock startled me at first, as I was unsure if it was just in my head. So I literally laid still in silence to see if I heard anything else. I knew it couldn't be my roommate, as she was out of town for the week visiting family and attending a wedding. Shortly after, there was a second knock, just as hard. But no one yelled out or said anything. I'd like to say that I'm not easily scared and enjoy watching horror movies in my free time, but I found myself frozen in place, not able to move. No further knocks came, but I was too frightened to fall back asleep and didn't end up resting until around 4 a.m. I called my roommate in the morning, asking her if she knew anyone that could come to our door in the night, but she was as confused as I was. A week passed by, and I didn't really think much of it anymore. I sort of came to the conclusion that it was maybe someone drunk who mistaken our house for theirs, as it was a Saturday night when it happened. I work in a large chain grocery store doing night stacking a few days a week, with my shifts ending between 4 a.m. Usually, it was the next Saturday, and I was approaching the end of my shift when my roommate texted me, saying someone was knocking on the front door again. Even though I wasn't there, I was struck with the same kind of fear I had experienced the week prior. She reassured me that the doors were all locked. But I was scared, knowing the same thing happened to me the week prior. She kept in touch with me until my shift was over and told me that there was no second knock. When I arrived home, the front yard seemed untouched, and there was no one out walking the street. I must reinstate that it is a very quiet neighborhood with many elderly couples living on our street. In the morning, my roommate still seemed a bit shook up, so I put in an anonymous tip with a Crime Stopper service. But they never got back to me. Nothing else happened for the following month and a half. We were both going on with our lives like it never happened, but I stopped working Saturday nights as this was the only similarity between the two occurrences. That was until the most recent Saturday. I was up late in the living room, watching some old Black Mirror episodes as the new season was about to come out. It was around 1 a.m., and I had plans to go to bed after the episode I was watching. For context, the lounge room is practically right next to the front door, with the path to the door going past a large window. As I was watching, I saw the outside motion sensor light turn on from the bottom of the windowsill under the blinds. I froze. Up until this point, I had completely forgotten about the knocking, and I was stuck in fear. A short moment later, bang, bang, bang. At first, I was just going to sit there and wait for them to go, but after a second loud knock, I decided to look through the peephole quietly to see if it was someone familiar. My roommate had a few failed relationships that didn't end on good terms, so I assumed maybe it could be one of them. It wasn't. It was a woman. She was staring at the front door extremely still. It was like she was frozen. Her eyes were staring straight ahead with little to no expression. It felt like she could see me through the eye hole, just staring into my soul. I couldn't move. She stood there for another 2 or so minutes until she looked to the side and ran off. I called the cops and explained on the phone what had happened, and they sent someone out shortly later. They checked the cars parked on the street, but came up empty, handed as there was no damage, and they told me to call back if anything happened again. The thing that I couldn't get out of my head was the way she stood there, emotionless, staring straight ahead. And the way she ran off, she looked to be in her mid-30s, maybe 40, but was wearing a small nightdress and no shoes. Not only was this out of the ordinary, but it was freezing outside. Since then, I have ordered one of those doorbell cameras in case she does come back. But to be completely honest, I flinch whenever someone knocks on that door now. Cursed land? Haunted forest? This is a true story, and I've been kind of obsessing over what happened out there. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible without leaving out key details. My wife's Uncle Tom bought some land just north of Spokane, Washington, with a friend of the family Kane. They got it at a significant discount because a nearby aluminum smelter had polluted the ground and it was impossible to use the water beneath the ground. They had set up 2 plots and each had a camper to live in. Tom had been progressively getting paranoid and saying people were stalking him and watching him in the trees. About 3 months into living there, a man wandering through the woods had an interaction with Tom and ended up attacking him and breaking his jaw. Upon being arrested, the man said he was overcome with the desire to see if he could kill him with a single punch. 2 months later, Tom was murdered in his sleep on the couch in his camper. Kane found him and immediately ran as far away as he could until he stopped to call the police. There was sufficient evidence of who did it, and they quickly caught the killer, who was a 19-year-old boy who said he simply wanted his bike. He beat him to death with a power tool that was lying on the floor nearby and completely bashed his brains in. Kane was completely terrified at all times to be there alone. He had moved in with a family member until 8 months later, when he ended up with nowhere else to go and had to return. In constant fear, he finally convinced my pregnant wife and me to come stay with him. The second I turned off the highway onto the property, I was overcome with dread. There were at least 250 crows covering the dirt road up to the property. I didn't sleep whatsoever the first night. I stared into the forest, searching for the cause of my intense fear. The energy of this place was so uncomfortable, and I assumed it was simply knowing Uncle Tom was killed here. Even though the days were eerie, I never had a moment where I didn't feel watched here. My wife and I always had a sense of fear, especially after dark. Things sort of normalized for a while, until one day Kane began puking and feeling very lightheaded all the time. I took him to the hospital, and they said he was fine, probably with the flu. At this point, it was the anniversary of Tom's murder. 3 days after the date of Tom's death, Kane comes running out of his camper, screaming, "I can't breathe," waking my wife and me up, and we run out to see what's wrong. Kane had gotten into his car and floored it, crashing into a nearby tree. I run up and peer through the window to see the most intense and primal fear I've ever seen in someone's eyes. He was gasping and clutching his chest. Moments later, he breathed out one last time and he was dead. We gave him CPR for 30 minutes until IMS arrived. On July 10th, 1 year and 3 days after moving there with Tom's, they were both dead. Now it's only me and the wife alone on the property. Every moment, I lived in fear, not understanding what had happened here. I don't know why we didn't leave right away. One day, I came out to get fresh water from a drum we kept for water and smelled the worst smell I'd ever smelled. The water container had a 1-inch opening on top, and inside the water were bits and pieces of chipmunks, like spines and heads. They didn't fall in. Something ripped them apart before putting them inside. The nights were getting worse and worse. I never saw anything. I was just always filled with unease and intense fear. I grew up deep in the mountains of North Idaho, with the nearest town being 30 miles away. Fear in the woods, even at night, is new for me. Hearing crashing and footsteps every night. One night, my wife and I returned home to the worst feeling I'd ever felt. Everything looked different, although everything was right where we left it. Nothing seemed to be in place. Looking around, I suddenly see this orange, long-haired, manged cat sitting on a stump. This cat's eyes were so intense. Fiery, almost glowing, but not quite. We start hearing branches snapping and pine needles crunching. seemingly from every direction. I'm still staring at this cat, almost frozen in fear. Suddenly, a voice breaks out, echoing throughout the forest. "Hello, is anyone out here?" A little girl, I thought, but something was off. My wife yells back, "Hello, are you okay?" Anybody? The voice had changed. "Help! Help me!" we yelled back several times without response. "Somebody help me!" The most intense, shrieking, evil-sounding voice of a woman fills me with more intense fear than I can ever describe. But my wife is overcome with the need to find this person, and she started to head off into the forest without a word. I grabbed her by the arm and told her something wasn't right. Why wouldn't she respond to us? She tries to break free from me to go off alone. I tell her to get into the truck, and I'll grab the spotlights. We aren't going on foot. We roll the windows down and shine my intensely bright LED lights throughout the forest. We slowly creep down the road, yelling back. As we get further down the road, the voice strikes out. "Please, won't anyone fucking help?" Sounds are difficult to pin down in the woods, but this one was very close. I hit the brakes and stopped immediately. We shined the lights and yelled back, searching. There was no sign of anyone when suddenly the voice exploded into the cabin of the vehicle as if they were standing right outside my window. "Help. Me. Somebody help," leaving my ears hurting and ringing. I hit the gas and didn't look back. I called the police when I hit the highway, and afterwards they said there was no one around. I picked up our stuff the next day, and my wife gave birth the following day. We never stayed there again after the baby was born. What the hell could do these things? I never even believed in paranormal things before, but I don't know what else happened. I never really believed in the paranormal or the supernatural. I always thought the stories about people being haunted or possessed were just stories made up for entertainment or cases of severely mentally ill patients being misunderstood by fanatical priests claiming demonic possession. I never suspected that they were actually real, but when I was 13, my naive brain would be put in its place. It was the summer of 2007. Life was good. I had a pretty normal teenage life. I had a few friends my age who lived in the same neighborhood as me, and we would do a lot of outdoor activities like hiking, mountain biking, and fishing. We lived just north of the Ozark Mountains in a nice little town in Arkansas. My father had worked very hard to give us all a good life. He came from a poor family and joined the military at age 18 to better his future, and it paid off. He got a good job working on airplanes, and we moved to the country. My parents got a steal on a really nice old house in the village. It was a nice little community built into the woods that had golf courses, private lakes and trails, and its own shopping center with a Harps and a couple of restaurants. We were a happy, normal, middle-class family. That is, until that. There were a lot of local legends about the natives that used to inhabit the area. Supposedly, our entire community was built on top of sacred land. I used to walk the trails near my house a lot, and you could find cliffs and overhangs with Indian paintings on the walls and remnants of their civilization. I always felt bad about how they were driven from their homes by my ancestors, but I was still grateful for my home and my wonderful life. The kids at school would often scare each other by telling tales of shamans summoning skinwalkers and rakes, and to this day, they still haunt the woods at night, looking for a midnight snack. I always laughed it off. Ghosts and monsters aren't real. They're just made up stories to scare kids. I always thought the ghost hunter shows were ridiculous. You wouldn't hear or see anything on camera, but the people in the show would jump at a creek in the night, and suspenseful music would play while the camera focused on empty darkness. Those shows can be fun for the imagination, but the reality of paranormal entities is much more terrifying. They can tear apart families and bring your whole world crashing down. I would learn this dark reality one summer night. The air was cool. I had my window open, and I could hear the wind flowing through the leaves. The cicadas reverberating through the midnight woods put me in a sleepy trance. I relaxed and drifted off to sleep. In such a peaceful place, I was completely safe. I always felt one with the woods. It really is beautiful here. Cradled in the sounds of nature, I drifted deep into sleep. Then, a wave of panic. I feel every hair stand up. It chills down my spine. I feel the eyes of someone on me. I can feel their sinister intent. Every fiber in me is telling me to run. There is something here that wants to kill me. No, worse. It wants to own me and see me suffer. It has been watching me for a long time. I have been chosen. I can't breathe. Help me, I scream. Mom, I hear laughter. Not human, not a physical voice. Multiple voices of all octaves laughing at once. I can't open my eyes. I can't breathe or talk, but I see its eyes. Blue, bloodshot, bulging eyes. Huge pupils. Red is filling my mind. I feel pressure. My entire body is vibrating, and I feel like I'm going to explode. I gasp as I fully awaken. But as I open my eyes, I freeze. I can't believe what I'm seeing. Through my open door, I can see something laying on our living room couch. It's clearly visible, but clearly not a person. It's like a shadow, but flowing. The moonlight illuminates its face, a skull with a sinister smile. It has those same eyes from my dream. Huge, bulging, wide open eyes, crystal blue pupils. It's staring at me, smiling. It's awkwardly sprawled out on the couch, and its shadowy body, like a translucent but pitch black cloak, flows as if underwater. I'm getting chills just typing this, and I want to be clear that this is not a fictional story. This really happened. I was so scared, I was frozen. I felt electricity going up and down my spine and through my brain. My eyes were wide and watering. My mouth hung open. It stared into my eyes, into my mind for what felt like hours. It then quickly shifted out of sight. It darted down the couch and into the shadows. Adrenaline hit me, and I ran into my parents' room. I burst open the door, panting, and covered myself in sweat. My parents were at first annoyed, and it was the typical thing parents do when something like this happens. But as I described every detail about my encounter, and when they saw how terrified I was, I started to see a look of unease and fear in my father's eyes. He was scared. He believed me. My father, being a devout Christian, believed in demons, and he was convinced I had just been tormented and that I was in danger. He was very serious, and I could see that he was disturbed by what had just happened. He woke up my little sister, and the whole family gathered in the living room. I wish my dad had never done what he did next. He got out his Bible and turned the pages to a verse. I don't quite remember the actual verse, but it was something about casting out demons. In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave my family alone, he yelled angrily, cursing the demon. If you want one of us, take me. Leave my family alone. We sat in the living room talking well into the night, and after a while, we were all tired and went back to bed. I couldn't sleep though. I couldn't forget those eyes and their evil smile. The way it moved, it was disturbing. Fast forward a few months and things were normal. Me and my sister went back to school, and for the most part I had forgotten all about the demon. I even convinced myself it was a bad dream, or even sleep paralysis. Even though that was the only time sleep paralysis had ever happened to me, I went on with my life, until we got the worst news I had ever heard to this day. My dad was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer, and it had spread. He was dying. We were devastated. I hugged my father and cried all day that day. I couldn't believe I was going to lose my dad. He was always so strong and seemed very healthy. The weird thing is, and the doctors were also puzzled, his cancer was usually only found in teenagers. It was a cancer that, almost 100 of the time, was only found in boys in their early teens. This shocked me and made me feel guilty. The whole experience of the demon became prominent in my mind, and I remembered my father's words to the demon. I think it had its eye on me, but went after my dad instead. I wish it had taken me though. My family would be much better off today if it had. My father remained positive through his sickness. He went to chemotherapy sessions, started eating healthier, and worked out as much as he could. With his bald head and amputated leg, people would often come up to him and thank him for his service. He always laughed and said thank you, because he was a veteran. However, contrary to what people thought, his condition was much worse than if he had stepped on an IDED. He lived for 3 more years, even though the doctors said he had less than a year to live. He always stayed happy and positive, more for our sake than his own. But toward the end, he started to slowly deteriorate. It was awful. I couldn't do anything to help him. The man I looked up to who protected us and whom I always saw as invincible was crumbling before me. He lost all his weight and started sleeping on the couch to not disturb my mom. He was so sick. He suffered so much. I would hear his death rattles and moans and want nothing more than to help him in any way I could. Something that disturbs me so much to this day is that I started to realize something. He more and more resembled the demon. He was getting so thin that he looked like a skeleton, and he had very blue eyes. Sometimes he would just look at me from the couch, and I would get chills. The demon had been mocking me. I imitated what he would do to my father while viciously smiling, as if it were funny. This enrages me. How can something be so vile, so purely evil? My poor father soon died and left us a broken family. My mother fell into a deep depression. I looked after my little sister and tried to be the best father figure I could be, even though I was a poor substitute. We fell behind on the bills, and the bank foreclosed our house. We lost everything. The next handful of years were a struggle, but now I'm adult and have gotten some sort of stable life. I recently figured out why my father was so shaken that night and didn't just blow it off as a bad dream. I visited my sister recently, and we started talking about ghosts and the paranormal. I asked if she had ever seen anything like that, and she hesitated for a second, but then told me, and what she said gave me the chills. She was very young the night I saw the demon, and she had largely forgotten that night, but she told me she used to see a shadowy man standing at the end of her bed. He had a skull for a face. Demons are real,